Book 7, Chapter 8 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 8. Count Ilya Rostov had resigned the position of Marshal of the Nobility because it involved him in too much expense, but still his affairs did not improve. Natasha and Nicholas often noticed their parents conferring together anxiously and privately, and heard suggestions of selling the fine ancestral Rostov house and estate near Moscow. It was not necessary to entertain so freely as when the Count had been Marshal, and life at Otradno was quieter than in former years, but still the enormous house and its lodges were full of people, and more than 20 sat down to table every day. These were all their own people who had settled down in the house almost as members of the family, or persons who were, it seemed, obliged to live in the Count's house. Such were Dimmler, the musician, and his wife, Vogel, the dancing-master, and his family, Belova, an old maiden lady and inmate of the house, and many others such as Petya's tutors, the girl's former governess, and other people who simply found it preferable and more advantageous to live in the Count's house than at home. They had not as many visitors as before, but the old habits of life without which the Count and Countess could not conceive of existence remained unchanged. There was still the hunting establishment which Nicholas had even enlarged, the same 50 horses and 15 grooms in the stables, the same expensive presents and dinner parties to the whole district on name days. There were still the Count's games of whist and Boston, at which, spreading out his cards so that everybody could see them, he let himself be plundered of hundreds of rubles every day by his neighbors, who looked upon an opportunity to play a rubber with Count Rostov as a most profitable source of income. The Count moved in his affairs as in a huge net, trying not to believe that he was entangled, but becoming more and more so at every step, and feeling too feeble to break the meshes or to set to work carefully and patiently to disentangle them. The Countess, with her loving heart, felt that her children were being ruined, that it was not the Count's fault, for he could not help being what he was, that, though he tried to hide it, he himself suffered from the consciousness of his own and his children's ruin, and she tried to find means of remedying the position. From her feminine point of view, she could see only one solution, namely, for Nicholas to marry a rich heiress. She felt this to be their last hope, and that if Nicholas refused the match she had found for him, she would have to abandon the hope of ever getting matters right. This match was with Julie Karagina, the daughter of excellent and virtuous parents, a girl the Rostovs had known from childhood, and who had now become a wealthy heiress through the death of the last of her brothers. The Countess had written direct to Julie's mother in Moscow suggesting a marriage between their children, and had received a favorable answer from her. Karagina had replied that for her part she was agreeable, and everything depended on her daughter's inclination. She invited Nicholas to come to Moscow. Several times the Countess, with tears in her eyes, told her son that, now both her daughters were settled, her only wish was to see him married. She said she could lie down in her grave peacefully if that were accomplished. Then she told him that she knew of a splendid girl and tried to discover what he thought about marriage. At other times she praised Julie to him and advised him to go to Moscow during the holidays to amuse himself. Nicholas guessed what his mother's remarks were leading to, and during one of these conversations induced her to speak quite frankly. She told him that her only hope of getting their affairs disentangled now lay in his marrying Julie Karagina. "But, Mamma, suppose I loved a girl who has no fortune. Would you expect me to sacrifice my feelings and my honor for the sake of money?" he asked his mother, not realizing the cruelty of his question and only wishing to show his noble-mindedness. "No, you have not understood me," said his mother, not knowing how to justify herself. "You have not understood me, Nikolenka. It is your happiness I wish for," she added, feeling that she was telling an untruth and was becoming entangled. She began to cry. "Mamma, don't cry. Only tell me that you wish it, and you know I will give my life, anything to put you at ease," said Nicholas. I would sacrifice anything for you, even my feelings." But the Countess did not want the question put like that. She did not want a sacrifice from her son. She herself wished to make a sacrifice for him. "No, you have not understood me. Don't let us talk about it," she replied, wiping away her tears. "Maybe I do love a poor girl," said Nicholas to himself. "Am I to sacrifice my feelings and my honor for money? I wonder how Mamma could speak so to me. Because Sonia is poor, I must not love her," he thought, "must not respond to her faithful, devoted love. Yet I should certainly be happier with her than with some doll like Julie. I can always sacrifice my feelings for my family's welfare," he said to himself, "but I can't coerce my feelings. If I love Sonia, that feeling is for me stronger and higher than all else." Nicholas did not go to Moscow, and the Countess did not renew the conversation with him about marriage. She saw with sorrow and sometimes with exasperation symptoms of a growing attachment between her son and the portionless Sonia. Though she blamed herself for it, she could not refrain from grumbling at and worrying Sonia, often pulling her up without reason, addressing her stiffly as "my dear," and using the formal "you" instead of the intimate "thou" in speaking to her. The kind-hearted Countess was the more vexed with Sonia because that poor, dark-eyed niece of hers was so meek, so kind, so devotedly grateful to her benefactors, and so faithfully, unchangingly, and unselfishly in love with Nicholas, that there were no grounds for finding fault with her. Nicholas was spending the last of his leave at home. A fourth letter had come from Prince Andrew, from Rome, in which he wrote that he would have been on his way back to Russia long ago had not his wound unexpectedly reopened in the warm climate, which obliged him to defer his return till the beginning of the new year. Natasha was still as much in love with her betrothed, found the same comfort in that love, and was still as ready to throw herself into all the pleasures of life as before. But at the end of the 4th month of their separation she began to have fits of depression which she could not master. She felt sorry for herself, sorry that she was being wasted all this time and of no use to anyone, while she felt herself so capable of loving and being loved. Things were not cheerful in the Rostovs' home. End of Book 7, Chapter 8. Book 7, Chapter 9 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 9. Christmas came, and except for the ceremonial mass, the solemn and wearisome Christmas congratulations from neighbors and servants, and the new dresses everyone put on, there were no special festivities, though the calm frost of 20 degrees Réaumur, the dazzling sunshine by day, and the starlight of the winter night seemed to call for some special celebration of the season. On the 3rd day of Christmas week, after the midday dinner, all the inmates of the house dispersed to various rooms. It was the dullest time of the day. Nicholas, who had been visiting some neighbors that morning, was asleep on the sitting-room sofa. The old Count was resting in his study. Sonia sat in the drawing-room at the round table, copying a design for embroidery. The Countess was playing Patience. Nastasia Ivanovna the buffoon sat with a sad face at the window with 2 old ladies. Natasha came into the room, went up to Sonia, glanced at what she was doing, and then went up to her mother and stood without speaking. "Why are you wandering about like an outcast?" asked her mother. "What do you want?" "Him. I want him. Now, this minute. I want him," said Natasha with glittering eyes and no sign of a smile. The Countess lifted her head and looked attentively at her daughter. "Don't look at me, Mamma. Don't look. I shall cry directly." "Sit down with me a little," said the Countess. "Mamma, I want him." "Why should I be wasted like this, Mamma?" Her voice broke, tears gushed from her eyes, and she turned quickly to hide them and left the room. She passed into the sitting room, stood there thinking a while, and then went into the maid's room. There an old maidservant was grumbling at a young girl who stood panting, having just run in through the cold from the serfs' quarters. "Stop playing. There's a time for everything," said the old woman. "Let her alone, Kontratevna," said Natasha. "Go, Mavrushka, go." Having released Mavrushka, Natasha crossed the dancing hall and went to the vestibule. There an old footman and two young ones were playing cards. They broke off and rose as she entered. "What can I do with them?" thought Natasha. "Oh, Nikita, please go. Where can I send him? Yes, go to the yard and fetch a fowl, please, a cock. And you, Misha, bring me some oats." "Just a few oats?" said Misha cheerfully and readily. "Go quickly," the old man urged him. "And you, Theodore, get me a piece of chalk." On her way past the butler's pantry, she told them to set a samovar, though it was not at all the time for tea. Foka, the butler, was the most ill-tempered person in the house. Natasha liked to test her power over him. He distrusted the order and asked whether the samovar was really wanted. "Oh dear, what a young lady," said Foka, pretending to frown at Natasha. No one in the house sent people about or gave them as much trouble as Natasha did. She could not see people unconcernedly, but had to send them on some errand. She seemed to be trying whether any of them would get angry or sulky with her, but the serfs fulfilled no one's orders so readily as they did hers. "What can I do? Where can I go?" thought she as she went slowly along the passage. "Nastasia Ivanovna, what sort of children shall I have?" she asked the buffoon, who was coming toward her in a woman's jacket. "Why, fleas, crickets, grasshoppers," answered the buffoon. Oh, Lord, it's always the same. Oh, where am I to go? What am I to do with myself?" And tapping with her heels, she ran quickly upstairs to see Vogel and his wife, who lived on the upper story. The two governesses were sitting with the Vogels at a table, on which were plates of raisins, walnuts, and almonds. The governesses were discussing whether it was cheaper to live in Moscow or Odessa. Natasha sat down, listened to their talk with a serious and thoughtful air, and then got up again. "The island of Madagascar," she said. "Madagascar," she repeated, articulating each syllable distinctly, and, not replying to Madame Schoss, who asked her what she was saying, she went out of the room. Her brother Petya was upstairs too. With the man in attendance on him, he was preparing fireworks to let off that night. "Petya, Petya," she called to him, "carry me downstairs." Petya ran up and offered her his back. She jumped on it, putting her arms round his neck, and he pranced along with her. "No, don't. The island of Madagascar," she said, and jumping off his back, she went downstairs. Having, as it were, reviewed her kingdom, tested her power, and made sure that everyone was submissive, but that all the same it was dull, Natasha betook herself to the ballroom, picked up her guitar, sat down in a dark corner behind a bookcase, and began to run her fingers over the strings in the bass, picking out a passage she recalled from an opera she had heard in Petersburg with Prince Andrew. What she drew from the guitar would have no meaning for other listeners, but in her imagination a whole series of reminiscences arose from those sounds. She sat behind the bookcase with her eyes fixed on a streak of light escaping from the pantry door, and listened to herself and pondered. She was in a mood for brooding on the past. Sonia passed to the pantry with a glass in her hand. Natasha glanced at her and at the crack in the pantry door, and it seemed to her that she remembered the light falling through that crack once before, and Sonia passing with a glass in her hand. Yes, it was exactly the same, thought Natasha. "Sonia, what is this?" she cried, twanging a thick string. "Oh, you are there," said Sonia with a start, and came near and listened. "I don't know. A storm?" she ventured timidly, afraid of being wrong. There, that's just how she started and just how she came up smiling timidly when all this happened before, thought Natasha, and in just the same way I thought there was something lacking in her. "No, it's the chorus from The Water Carrier. Listen." and Natasha sang the air of the chorus so that Sonia could catch it. "Where were you going?" she asked. "To change the water in this glass. I am just finishing the design." "You always find something to do, but I can't," said Natasha. "And where's Nicholas?" "Asleep, I think." "Sonia, go and wake him," said Natasha. "Tell him I want him to come and sing." She sat a while, wondering what the meaning of it all having happened before could be, and without solving this problem, or at all regretting not having done so, she again passed in fancy to the time when she was with him and he was looking at her with a lover's eyes. "Oh, if he would only come quicker! I am so afraid it will never be. And worst of all, I am growing old. That's the thing. There won't then be in me what there is now. But perhaps he'll come today, will come immediately. Perhaps he has come and is sitting in the drawing-room. Perhaps he came yesterday, and I have forgotten it." She rose, put down the guitar, and went to the drawing-room. All the domestic circle, tutors, governesses, and guests, were already at the tea-table. The servants stood round the table, but Prince Andrew was not there, and life was going on as before. "Ah, here she is," said the old Count, when he saw Natasha enter. "Well, sit down by me." But Natasha stayed by her mother and glanced round as if looking for something. "Mamma," she muttered, "give him to me. Give him, Mamma, quickly, quickly." And she again had difficulty in repressing her sobs. She sat down at the table and listened to the conversation between the elders and Nicholas, who had also come to the table. My God, the same faces, the same talk, Papa holding his cup and blowing in the same way," thought Natasha, feeling with horror a sense of repulsion rising up in her for the whole household, because they were always the same. After tea, Nicholas, Sonia, and Natasha went to the sitting-room, to their favorite corner where their most intimate talks always began. End of Book 7, Chapter 9.